The Artist is an unusual film for contemporary audiences due to the fact that it was made in the style of films from the period in which it takes place. It is silent. The form is reflective of the content. Difficult transition between sound and silent film. All art forms have their own history, and since narrative cinema has been used to represent history in the past, it makes sense that it can easily represent its own history. Up until the 1927 film The Jazz Singer, there had been no real successful releases of films with synchronized dialogue and sound. Cinema was purely visual, and this was enough for most artists. It had become its own unique language. A great amount of in-camera effects, production standards, theory, and cinematic language had to be established during this time, but the introduction of sound was such an abrupt step forward that for many the art form had become something else entirely. The Artist depicts the transition between the silent era and the classical Hollywood era in the silent style, because the protagonist is a silent era artist, resistant to these new changes. The silent era in classical Hollywood cinema is built on invisibility, a concept in two parts, both seen in the context and form of the artist. The first part, according to Barsham and Monahan, is a style which doesn't call attention to itself. The narrative in The Artist and the films of the period were as economic and seamless as possible in a cinematic language with which the audience is familiar. The second part is the standardized studio production. While The Artist was actually an independent production, it depicts the vertically integrated studio system of the 20s and 30s. According to the Film Inquiry, The Artist is only the second silent film to win Best Picture, because by the time the awards came around in 1930, silent film was already passé. In The Artist, the protagonist continues to produce a silent film while sound films become popular. His failure represents that of most artists that failed to make the change. The biggest film star of the era, Charlie Chaplin, successfully made two more silent films, City Lights and Modern Times, after 1927. Since then, silent cinema has rarely been produced, as it always lacked commercial potential compared to that of sound cinema. And this is still the case today. The director of The Artist, Michael Hazanavicius, says that audiences think that silent movies are old, but the fact is, they are old because they have been made in the 20s. That's the only thing that makes them old, not the format. The format is just a format. It's not an old format. This is a powerful lesson which can be taken from The Artist, which itself is now a part of film history.